A wedding is one of the most special events in life, marking a new beginning for a couple. Today, my husband and I were attending his sister's wedding. Honestly, I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. As the reception went on and everyone was served fancy French food, I was surprised to receive a kid's meal. Confused, I asked the staff about the mistake. But before I could get an answer, my mother-in-law walked up with a sly smile and asked if I was enjoying the wedding. She looked down on me as she spoke. Just as I was about to respond, my husband stepped in. My name is Olivia, and I'm 32 years old. I run my own clothing company, and I'm married to William, who's 34. We've been married for 3 years after meeting at a department store where he worked as a security guard. He stood out to me because he was younger than most of the other guards and had a strong yet slim build. I later found out he used to be a firefighter but retired early due to a lung injury from a fire. We met frequently when I visited the store for work, and eventually he asked me out. After dating for 2 years, we got married. Life with my husband is wonderful and we rarely argue. The only challenge is that we're both very busy with work, so we don't get much time together. I don't mind, except for one issue: his family. His older sister, Sarah, who is 35, can be quite difficult. One day, my husband and I managed to get the same day off, which is rare. We decided to go shopping together since I have been wanting to buy new shoes. Because of my busy schedule, I hardly get days off, so it was a special occasion for us. But just as we were about to leave, the doorbell rang at 7:00 a.m. My husband answered it, and to our surprise, it was Sarah with a suitcase. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" my husband asked, confused. She casually replied, "Let me stay here for a while." We were shocked and asked her why she hadn't told us she was coming. She explained that since her wedding was coming up and the venue was nearby, it would be more convenient for her to stay with us while she attended venue inspections and dress fittings. We were stunned that she just showed up unannounced, especially since we had been looking forward to spending the day together. I tried to protest, telling her that my husband and I had plans to go shopping. But instead of understanding, her face lit up and she said, "Great, I'll come with you. I need to look at baby stuff too." My husband and I exchanged looks, unsure of how to respond. She didn't seem to realize that we just wanted some time to ourselves. It became clear she was planning to join us for the day without even asking. Sarah glared at me and snapped, "What, you're trying to exclude me? Wait, you're from a single mother family, right?" I replied, "Yes, I am. So what?" Figures," she continued. "I've known people from single mother families, and they lack empathy. They always look down on others." Her words were dripping with irony because while accusing me of being judgmental, she was looking down on me. It was infuriating. She had both parents and was stereotyping me based on my upbringing. "That's prejudice," I shot back, trying to stay calm. "I'm not like that, and look, even William is uncomfortable." I glanced at my husband, who was glaring at his sister. "What's wrong, William? Got something to say to your own sister?" she taunted him. "Of course I do. Please, just go home," he said firmly. "Fine, but don't come crying to me later, especially you, Olivia," she sneered at me before leaving. I wondered why she singled me out, but I kept my cool. "Thanks for the warning," I replied nonchalantly, and with that, she finally left. After getting rid of her, we had breakfast and went to the nearby mall. But our day of bad luck wasn't over. As we were resting on a bench after shopping, we unexpectedly ran into Sarah again. Well, look who it is," she said, as if running into us was some sort of game. My husband muttered under his breath, "Sice." Just then, we heard someone else calling her name. It was a familiar voice, my mother-in-law. "Sarah, let's go check out those luxury bags," she said, approaching us. She noticed us and added, "Oh, William, Olivia, you two are here too." My husband sighed, clearly exhausted. I felt the same way. Dealing with Sarah was hard enough, but his mother made things even worse. She quickly showed her unpleasant side. "Is that bag from Infinity Tread Shoes?" she asked, pointing at the shopping bag my husband was holding. "Yeah, it is," he replied. She and Sarah exchanged mocking looks and started laughing. "Since when do you buy such cheap shoes? Look at our matching luxury brand shoes," she said, flashing their expensive footwear. Then she added, "William, choosing the wrong partner brings misfortune." Their disdainful gazes were aimed squarely at me. It was clear I was the main target of their disdain. "Are you talking about me?" I asked impulsively. My sister-in-law smirked. I wonder if we are," dodging the question and throwing more insults my way. Before I could respond, my husband cut in, "Enough, Mom. Your constant bragging about wealth has always been embarrassing and annoying." I had never seen him so angry. His job as a security guard gave his voice authority, but it didn't seem to affect them at all. "William, you were born into a wealthy family. Are you really okay being with this uneducated poor woman? My mother-in-law scoffed. Education doesn't matter much these days, Olivia A's, my husband began, but they cut him off before he could finish. Despite there being his family, he was defending me, and that alone made me happy and strengthened my trust in him. That's not true, Sarah snapped. Dad got his job at a major company because of his education. He's even the vice president now and will soon be president. You graduated from a prestigious university and yet you're with her? You've really fallen, William. They treated me like an outsider, steering the conversation back to their elitist views, showing no remorse despite my husband's efforts to defend me. To me, their attitudes seemed utterly rotten. How much do you even earn, by the way? Dad used to make $120,000. Before I could finish, Sarah interrupted with a mocking laugh. $120,000 a month? Oh, that's cute, she said sarcastically. Sorry, I should be more considerate. It must be tough, especially for a dropout. My husband tried to interject again. Hey, enough, but Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, brushing him off. Well, good luck with that, Sarah said smugly. My husband was visibly angry, and I felt a surge of hatred rise within me, but they were completely oblivious to our feelings, continuing their conversation like nothing happened. Oh, and you both better attend the wedding, Sarah added. Mom's preparing a grand event. Yes, my mother-in-law chimed in. We're sparing no expense for our darling daughter's big day. You're coming, right? The pressure from my mother-in-law made me feel like I couldn't say no. Since my husband, being family, was obviously going to attend, I reluctantly agreed to go. If it weren't for him, I would never have gone to such a wedding. The day of my sister-in-law Sarah's wedding arrived. I had managed to finish all my piled-up work and even bought a new dress with my husband for the occasion. When we arrived at the venue, it was clear my mother-in-law hadn't exaggerated. The luxury hotel, the huge ballroom, extravagant decorations, and an enormous wedding cake all screamed of lavishness. You both made it, my mother-in-law greeted us as we walked in. I could tell my husband wasn't thrilled. Not that I wanted to come, he muttered under his breath, his expression showing an unusual wariness toward his mother. This wedding cost $100,000. We have 500 guests, and the meal is a special course by a top chef. Impressive, isn't it? Only we could pull off something like this, she bragged, looking down on everyone. Yet, most people passing by only offered polite smiles and nods, clearly unimpressed by her flaunting. I was appalled by her need to show off. My husband voiced what I was thinking. Why didn't you spend this much on our wedding? His words reflected the truth. Our wedding had been simple, costing only $20,000 with just close family and friends invited. But I had been happy with it, content even. Still, there was no denying the difference in treatment. After all, my husband was her son, yet Sarah's wedding was far more extravagant. What are you talking about? My mother-in-law scoffed. Sarah's fiancé, Alex, is going to work directly under Dad soon. When Dad becomes president, Alex will be groomed to be a key player in the company. It's only natural we celebrate like this. My mother-in-law laughed proudly and said, we welcomed him properly. While we were talking, my father-in-law joined us and said, Emily, it's almost time for Sarah and Alex to make their entrance. Aren't you going to take pictures from the front row? It felt like he was trying to end our conversation, but it seemed like he also had a problem with us. After speaking to my mother-in-law, he turned to us and said, it's been a while, Olivia. You should feel honored to be invited to such a fancy wedding. You probably won't experience something like this again in your life. Unlike my mother-in-law, he spoke calmly, but his words were still full of arrogance. My husband couldn't stay quiet and responded, why do you have to say it like that, Dad? With a cold look, my father-in-law replied, don't misunderstand. I never approved of your marriage. Remember the conditions I set. My husband briefly glanced at me and then looked away. I had never heard about this before. It was news to me that his dad hadn't approved of our marriage. Turning away from me, my husband spoke softly. Graduate from a famous university, earn over $100,000 a year. That's right, you remember well, his father said. Then, turning to look at me briefly, he added, Olivia did drop out, but it doesn't matter, she's making money. Before my husband could continue, my mother-in-law interrupted by shouting, Daniel, look. Sarah has changed into her second dress. She yelled so loudly that it drew attention, though people forced smiles at her behavior since it was her daughter's wedding. Called away by my mother-in-law, my father-in-law said, we'll talk about this later, and walked off. Watching his father leave, my husband quietly said, Olivia is much more amazing than you think, Dad. His words comforted me. Knowing he was on my side, no matter what, lifted my spirits more than anything. When the bride and groom finally made their entrance, the hall erupted in applause. The feast began with my sister-in-law announcing, "We have a special course prepared by a top chef today, please enjoy it." As she finished, the waitstaff began serving the food. However, I noticed my mother-in-law arguing with a server nearby. "Are you sure about this?" the server asked, looking uncomfortable. "Yes, just do it," my mother-in-law replied. When my meal finally arrived after some time, I was shocked. In front of me was a kid's meal. Confused, I calmly asked the server, "Excuse me, but there must be a mistake." The server, clearly uncomfortable, was the same one who had been talking to my mother-in-law earlier. "Can you replace it, please?" I added, but the server remained silent before finally speaking. "This isn't a mistake. I was instructed to serve you the kid's meal." "What?" I said, my voice filled with surprise. My husband, noticing something was wrong, joined in. "What's wrong, Olivia? Why a kid's meal?" he asked, equally puzzled by the situation. "Why is my meal different from everyone else's?" I asked, feeling embarrassed as people around us started to stare. "I don't know either," I said, trying to make sense of the situation. Just then, my mother-in-law approached, laughing. "How's your meal? Perfect for a dropout from a single-parent home, right? If you don't like it, you can leave," she said, her words dripping with cruelty. I was at my limit. As much as I disliked my sister-in-law, I had held back out of respect for her wedding. But seeing as it was my mother-in-law who orchestrated the event, causing the disruption, I felt no need to restrain myself any longer. Before I could respond, though, my husband spoke up. "Seriously, what are you doing? Aren't you embarrassed by this childish behavior?" His voice was calm but filled with anger, and his eyes showed a coldness I had never seen before, as if he were looking down on someone beneath him. "Childish? What are you talking about?" My mother-in-law feigned innocence, but my husband didn't let her off the hook. Everything. Why serve a kid's meal to an adult? It's obvious Olivia wouldn't order something like that." My mother-in-law's face turned red as she retorted, "Marrying a poor woman, and now you dare to talk back to us. You've become just a commoner. Since you married her, you've strayed from our family's path," my mother-in-law sneered. Her attitude, suggesting that wealth made people superior, was appalling, even more extreme than usual. I decided to cut into the conversation, speaking coldly. "Yes, I did drop out of school, but that was because my parents passed away before I could finish middle school. Despite that, I'm now the president of a company." "President?" my mother-in-law scoffed. "I bet it's nothing important." Her arrogance was unrelenting. I sighed, feeling annoyed by her childish attitude. "I didn't want to do this, but fine," I muttered, causing her to look at me curiously. "What exactly do you do?" she asked, clearly still believing she had the upper hand. "Daniel works for Solar Burst Innovations, right?" I asked, "and he's going to be the next president." "Yes, that's right," she said proudly. "Well, the current president, Morgan, is a major client of my company. The socks distributed to his employees each month, they're commissioned directly from my company by Morgan himself." My mother-in-law was momentarily speechless. I continued, "The socks we develop are known for their comfort, even after long hours of wear. We originally used the technology for t-shirts, but now we supply all kinds of clothing. Everything Morgan wears comes from my company." The reality of my success finally began to sink in for her. I was the one who suggested Morgan try our socks for his entire company. After that, he decided to provide them to all his employees, and our professional relationship became close. As I mentioned, everything Morgan wears is made by my company. So, even if you're bragging about your husband becoming the next president, I could easily talk to Morgan, and that dream might disappear. Hearing this, my mother-in-law's face turned pale, as if a sudden shock had hit her. "You know him? The president of my husband's company?" she stammered. I nodded. "Did you know Morgan didn't go to high school either? He's one of those uneducated people you look down on." "Shall I tell him exactly what you said about education being so important?" Her expression crumbled, and she quickly pleaded, "Please no, don't do that." Her once superior attitude had vanished, and now she looked weak and desperate. It was clear how easily people like her crumble when their power is threatened. Just then, my father-in-law rushed over. I repeated, "I'll advise Morgan not to make Daniel president. What do you think about that?" "Please don't do that," he responded, his pride wavering. I remained surprisingly calm as I confronted both of them, watching their arrogance melt away. Around us, the crowd started to murmur, sensing that something was wrong. My sister-in-law, unaware of the situation, approached the table and asked, "What's all this fuss about?" I turned to her and said bluntly, "Sarah, by the way, I make over $120,000 a year, and my business is stable. I didn't mention it before because you interrupted our conversation the other day." Her face twisted in shock, and she stood frozen, gripping her dress tightly. The entire in-law family now looked as though their spirits had been drained. "So, everything you've been doing to me," I continued, "was just harassment," I finished, "and it's only hurt Daniel's chances at the company." As I said this, my mother-in-law suddenly dropped to her knees, begging for forgiveness. She clasped her hands together, pleading, "I'm sorry, please, I beg you, forgive me." Watching her, I wondered if she had any pride left at all. Her willingness to get on the floor so easily was almost surprising, but it wasn't enough for me to forgive them. "No, I won't," I replied firmly. "You've judged and insulted people based on their appearances, and now you need to face the consequences." Desperately, she added, "Please, we've almost used up all our savings for this wedding. If my husband doesn't become president and get a higher salary, we'll struggle financially." My father-in-law, following her example, also got on the floor, begging for forgiveness. My sister-in-law stood by, watching helplessly, and finally asked in a shaky voice, "Dad, you're out of money?" "Yes, I used everything I had to pay for this wedding as a gift to you two." Her voice trembled as she asked, "What about our honeymoon funds? What about Alex's promotion?" But it was clear that her concern was only about her own situation, not about fixing anything or taking responsibility. "Wait, you've been bragging about being wealthy, and now you're telling me you were planning to use your parents' money for the honeymoon? How embarrassing," I said, shaking my head. My sister-in-law tried to argue, but she had nothing left to say. I looked at all three of them and declared, "Real wealthy people and celebrities don't need to brag. In other words, you're all just pretending. Know your place." My harsh words left them completely defeated. My husband murmured his admiration for how I handled the situation. After that, the wedding was no longer possible, and we suddenly had nothing to do. We left the sad, failed wedding behind. Later, I explained everything to Morgan. He understood and said, "So it wouldn't be fun for you if Daniel became president, right?" I nodded, and Morgan continued, "Don't worry, I won't make Daniel president after he insulted you. In fact, I'm thinking of transferring him to an overseas branch." Morgan laughed as he said this. A week later, my father-in-law came rushing to us, desperate. "Please convince Morgan to cancel the overseas transfer." His face was filled with fear, as Morgan had seriously started the process of transferring him to another branch, in Brazil, half a day's flight away. I could barely hold back my laughter. In the end, Morgan didn't cancel the transfer, and my father-in-law, unable to go to Brazil, resigned from the company. To make matters worse for my sister-in-law, her fiancé was also caught up in the chaos. The wedding was ruined, and the position he was promised at my father-in-law's company was no longer available after the resignation. He had originally worked in Italy, but now, his plans were falling apart. He moved to America for the wedding, only to be caught up in this crazy drama. In the end, my sister-in-law's marriage was called off, leaving her in shock and eventually hospitalized. My mother-in-law, overwhelmed by the collapse of my father-in-law's career and my sister-in-law's mental breakdown, lost all her hair and now looks much older. As my husband said, the lives of these three people, who once insulted others freely, lost their shine quickly, like a diamond that turns out to be just a lump of coal. Their wealthy lifestyle was nothing but a show. It's clear that life can change dramatically because of a single event, for better or worse. This was one such moment. As for me, I'm using my savings to prepare for building my dream home with my husband. While my in-laws' lives were getting harder, my business was booming. Additionally, with things settling down, I found out I was pregnant. With financial stability and a growing family, we must seem like celebrities to my current in-laws. Still, I made a promise to myself to live happily with my husband and our future child, and to stay humble no matter what.